Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this joint webinar with Cadence Solutions and filerskeepers. Today we'll be talking about how from governance to intelligence, how data governance prepares for AI. We are thinking I think we'll just get started, Adrian, and let people join. We're recording, so people can always get back to the beginning. Maybe we can go and start. All right. So welcome everyone. We're recording today's session, so you can rewatch or share it later. I would love to hear your thoughts. So please ask questions in the Q&A and grab a coffee and get comfortable. We are hoping to give you a bit of time back at the end, but no promises, of course, because we really feel very dearly about this topic today. So maybe we can just get into it. So for those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Wanne Pemelaar. I'm the co-founder, currently CEO for filerskeepers, and also a baby company called Lawstronaut. What we do is we read all the laws in the world, and then we take from their rules to tell companies how long they should store their records and data, and then we help apply those rules to the records and data of our clients. And we have a dashboard where you can say, hey, I'm in these jurisdictions, these industries, build me a bespoke retention schedule. Now that our clients have a retention schedule, they usually ask us, now what? What do we do? And then I tell them, now you implement. And for that, I have invited Adriano Marini, who is the Director of Sales and Customer Success, and I think the all-around commercial guy at Cadence Solutions, and I'll have Adriano introduce himself and the company, he has a lot of knowledge to share about Microsoft and records retention there.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, great to meet everyone. My name is Adriano Marini. I am the Director of Sales and Customer Success, the all-around commercial guy at Cadence Solutions. We're a small boutique consulting firm located in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and we specialize in implementing records retention across the Microsoft suite. So we've been in business about 14 years, and I myself have been in implementing records retention for about 10 years. And that type of experience comes from years of different tools, but the same type of strategy of making sure that we have effective, efficient, but also not overburdening solutions for retaining records effectively and efficiently. Just by way of a quick introduction to us as a company, Jordan Uterhagen, who's our CEO, started on the customer side of the desk. He was at a county government here in the Edmonton metropolitan area. And as they started to implement with a big name, big ticket consulting firm, they immediately started to struggle and get a lot of budget concerns effectively within the first 3 months of the project. So we built our practice on being more efficient and effective, and ultimately treating our customers better than some of those big consulting firms for implementing such an important cornerstone of your data protection environment. We are a Microsoft partner now, formerly an OpenText partner. We do still do some OpenText work, but lately we found a lot of people are really seeking good solutions in the Microsoft environment. And as a result, we are Microsoft partners 4 times over, including security and modern work. And we also have a partnership with AvePoint, where Microsoft sometimes is not enough. We can bring in AvePoint to help close some of those gaps as well. We've done over 120 projects that have included migrations of content and enforcing retention across Microsoft products. And that has been for some public sector, some private sector, some large, some small, across North America, and even some into across the world as well. This is just a highlight of some of our public sector clients just for visibility, but we have a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries that we've helped over our past 14 years. So that's us. And again, we're happy to be here today to share more about this topic near and dear to our hearts, but focused on how we can leverage some of those solutions in the Microsoft stack to make life easier and to make life more ready for AI. So with that, I'll pass it back to Vanna for the intro to the topic.
Yeah. So a lot of our clients are coming to us with the question: we got a retention schedule, now what? And also, like, we want to turn on Copilot and in Microsoft, or maybe we want to just use Purview. We want to get our act together in Microsoft. What do we do? And that's not that simple. You have a lot of different strategies. You can, I believe that Microsoft and Purview in particular is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You can use it for various purposes. There's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of also doubt. Can we even get this off the ground? And can we actually help our organization with this, or shall we just turn to a structured system and fix records management there, and just not bother about Microsoft at all? But then again, everybody has bought into AI. You're not just chatting; you're now building agents, and those agents are roaming the database and finding all kinds of information. But the results might not always be as satisfactory as people would like to do. So we want to talk about how do you get ready for AI, how do you use Purview in Microsoft. So this is a little agenda that we want to go through, and maybe we can go to the next slide. So so what I find funny is that all the cool AI and legal innovation lawyers are rediscovering records management. Everybody's now talking about it. This is a little post that I shared on LinkedIn, where legal creatives, regular publisher of legal technology and news items, talks about the structural depth hidden in our documents. And I find that very fascinating, because all these really cool lawyers couldn't care less about records management a couple of years ago. Now they suddenly are looking at the results and they're like, whoa, okay, there's a lot of rot in here. We need to fix this. We need to clean this up. And we shouldn't create a Frankenstein monster of out of this mess, basically. Yeah, maybe we can go to the next slide. So yeah, a lot of people ask us, okay, but I got a retention schedule, but how do I make that retention schedule now Purview ready? I need to clean up the clutter. I need to make sure that there's not something that's too old in my Microsoft setup. Well, first of all, you absolutely need to create golden standard record labels. Yeah, we have a little a connector between our My Schedule functionality and Microsoft Purview, and when we feed the retention schedule to Purview, it kind of stops at around 1,000 record labels. And if you can imagine, you're in, I don't know, 50 countries or states, you have 200 record types defined, that is technically 10,000 results. And you can't just feed Purview all the retention labels that you have in your schedule. You need to limit yourself, and that's where you should be able to kind of like create a golden standard, maybe a few exceptions to that golden standard, and you'll be fine. And you have a couple of hundred retention labels that you can apply. So your retention periods will be fed as record labels into Purview, and your jurisdiction is a logic. Yeah. So you need to kind of create, legal variation. Those exceptions are super important to make sure that you have a good level of compliance. Very clear retention triggers. It's very important. in Microsoft to have system detectable events. This is where I also want to hear from Adriano, where we can still win, because Microsoft has a few that they determine themselves, and then there are a few that are open-ended. You can kind of like code anything you want in there. They make it seem. I'm not sure if that's even true. And then every single record label that you create within Purview needs to have a defensible foundation. Basically, you need to be able to justify what you the labels that you put into the retention into Purview, basically. You need to structure your taxonomy, because it needs to really align with what Purview will find in your database. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to create, I don't know, a schedule for HR, if what you're going to find in Microsoft is also, I don't know, finance related or real estate or legal, whatever, what have you. Yeah. And okay, so I already got a question from Sarah. Is the 1,000 label limit in Purview for all license types? E3, E5? I think so. I think it is. I see Adriana also nodding. Yeah. And is it also for all entities in a tenant? I think so. Yeah, right.
Generally, it's a tenant-wide limit, and does not matter for licenses.
No. So there you go. Yeah. So you have to really restrict yourself. Did we speak with Microsoft about this? Yes, we did. Did we change their mind? No, they did say it was a good idea, but that doesn't always mean a lot. All right. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And by the way, I let Adriano handle the slides today, because he's gonna speak more than I am. So the questions are: how do we manage documents in M365, and how do we implement it? In our schedule into Teams or SharePoint. It's a big mess. Should we even use Purview? Right? Maybe that's something that you also can speak to. Yes, you should use Purview, but it has its limits. You can't solve your problems in an old file share or with Purview, or you can't fix your problems in SAP with Purview. Yeah, so it is really a tool meant for the online environment of Microsoft. So it's something to really think about. But a lot of people have it as part of their license package already, so why not use it, right? So yeah. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So I believe, I'm also very interested in the opinion of Cadence Solutions, of course, but I believe that we have a legacy problem. In other words, we created a mess of our SharePoint and team sites. I heard of one Big Four in the Netherlands, just the Netherlands, who said, in 1.5 year time, we created 2,500 team sites, and there was no structure to it. Some are important, most aren't. We don't know what's in them. So that's a huge problem, and you need to fix your legacy. You need to clean it up. But you also might have a future-facing problem. How do we make sure that even though we clean up the mess, how do we make sure that we don't end up in the same mess again in a few years from now? Yeah, so I believe that you should not only look at the problem from a purely Microsoft technological perspective. You also have to apply a records management perspective, and you need to think ahead and maybe redesign your SharePoints in such a way that it facilitates compliance, rather than that it just fixes an old problem that you have. Yeah. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Cadence Solutions who have way more knowledge than me. This is basically everything I know about Microsoft. So I'm just going to sit back and listen to you, Adriana.
Problem. Thank you again. So before we get deeper into kind of the way we see things and the recommendations about these two issues, and I want to echo what Vanna said. These are the issues facing our customers today. These are the questions that we are being asked. How do we clean up the mess, and how do we prevent the mess from happening again? But I want to take a step back and talk about a real actual problem that people are facing as a result of the mess. The mess has caused a big gap for people. And even if you think about turning on Copilot, this gap alone is causing people to be absolutely gobsmacked and frightened and not sure what to do because of this specific problems. And it's called data oversharing. So from the future facing problem, it's a question of security, but even from the historical problem, if you have stuff, if you have mess in your SharePoint environment and you don't have control over the sharing question, this problem may come to bear. So just walking you through a quick scenario, sharing in SharePoint is very simple. I always make the joke that if you don't have sharing in SharePoint, you just have point, and that's pretty boring. So you have to be able to share, right? That's a cornerstone of the platform. But that sharing, with great sharing comes great responsibility. And that is something that people often aren't aware of. So people just share something, and if the settings aren't done properly, or if people aren't paying attention, they end up oversharing very easily. I have complained to Microsoft multiple times that, first off, the default sharing setting in SharePoint is people within your organization, which means if you just click share link, automatically that document is now available to everyone inside your organization. And that is just wild to me, right? Because if someone gets a hold of that link, even if you didn't intend to share it with them, suddenly they have the capability to get access to that document if they got a hold of the link. So let's talk about this for a second. Johnny is the creator of a document. He wants to share it with Mary. Sally is irrelevant. Sally's in a different department. She is not supposed to have any access to the document at all. So Johnny goes in, he shares to Mary, but accidentally, because the default setting is to everyone in the organization, leaves the link as people in Cadence Solutions Inc. So even though Johnny only wanted Mary to have access to the document, suddenly Sally has access to the document. And that is a risk. But Johnny only sends the link to Mary, even though it accidentally shared it to everyone in the organization. Technically speaking, Mary isn't actually going to be able to access it unless she gets a hold of the link. So that's a background accidental overshare. That wasn't a problem until Copilot comes into play, because Copilot is going to see that link. Mary has access. And if Mary asks Copilot about that document, it's going to return that document to Mary. Now, taking this from the future forward perspective, the question of how do I prevent this from happening comes down to good governance to make sure that you are not exposing things that shouldn't be exposed to Copilot, and that your people are trained up in how to not prevent that from happening. And that's the big question of good future focused governance frameworks to support your ongoing use of SharePoint. But the back end problem, the historical problem, is what if someone shared this 5 years ago and this document still exists and that sharing link still exists? Copilot's net new. Copilot will take advantage of it. And that's the big risk about not cleaning up our old mess. Because if these exist, Copilot will take advantage of them, and Copilot will surface those documents for Mary, regardless of how old that document is. It brings back up, and I think this is, to Vanna's point, why people are now suddenly coming full circle on records management, because Copilot and this specific problem is suddenly asking the question of, well, why didn't we get rid of that document 4 years ago when it expired and when we were allowed to get rid of it? Because now it's coming up in Copilot and we don't want it to come up in Copilot anymore. So in reality, to take this a step back and talk about this from a higher level perspective for a second, what we're trying to do is we're trying to achieve data governance. I don't think that's a mystery to anyone. Data governance is this big esoteric topic that is talked about at length, and people don't really know how to get to. But really, what we're trying to solve is we're trying to understand what we have, where that data is located, who has access to that data, and how do people find and use it. Talking from a framework perspective, answering these questions now brings you back to the topic of trying to answer this by structuring your SharePoint in a way that supports your understanding of these four aspects of data governance. You want to know what's in your SharePoint. You want to know how it's structured in your SharePoint. You want to know who has access to the SharePoint sites, who has access to individual documents, what sharing links exist. And you want to know how people are using, for example, Copilot to get to that data, to access that data, to work with that data, to understand that data in a different way. So this framework idea probably sounds pretty complex, but a lot of it can be answered with Purview and with a good structure in SharePoint as well. Together, the power of information architecture, as we call it, is really brought to the forefront because we get the opportunity to answer these questions by structuring SharePoint in a way that then supports us to use the tools in Purview to govern that data and make sure we close those gaps by getting rid of the stuff we don't need, by adding sensitivity labels to the stuff we do need, but we don't want Copilot to touch, and by doing things like data loss prevention to protect that data, keep it in our tenant, and prevent it from leaking outside of the walls of our walled garden. So this process obviously is quite complex, right? But we have the tools available to us. And to Vanna's point, a lot of us have these tools in our license package already. And that's where we come in to kind of help organizations take advantage of what's available to them. And when we come in and we start to address these problems, our goal is to build a solution that leverages the tools that exist in a way that gives you the visibility, the control, and helps you avoid some of these risks that we're talking about today. So for a moment, I want to take a look at this slide, and I'm going to give full credit to our friends at Microsoft and the mothership who made this slide for us. And these are the things that they are now telling to all of the clients who are considering Copilot. If you are considering Copilot, do these 7 things. Did I count that right? I think it. Anyway, do these 7 things now, and then you'll be ready for that next step of implementing Copilot. And this came out of a couple stories that have been making their rounds throughout the information management community, where there were large companies who turned on Copilot on day one. They were super excited, ready to be at the forefront, at the cusp of innovation. And then someone queried something they shouldn't have to Copilot, and a document popped up that shouldn't have, and suddenly it's a huge risk and all the C-suite wants to shut it down. So Microsoft recognized that and has been continually improving tools that are available to us to make life easier. So what does Microsoft tell us that we should do just as the beginning steps in this journey? Well, archive and delete old and inactive content. Great, you probably need a retention schedule to do that. That is traditional records management, 100%. That's recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 2 is get visibility and reports into your content. Again, super important. Having a good structure in SharePoint makes that super easy. Restrict access or limit scope of search or Copilot. The best way to do that, sensitivity labels. Make sure that Copilot only can touch certain things in your environment, and make sure that it's restricted to only the stuff you want it to be able to index and return through queries. And those 4 at the bottom are subsets of the above ones, right? We want to establish that data retention policy, get those labels into Purview, get them onto content, apply those retention labels, start doing disposition, apply sensitivity labels, and apply DLP. All these things are available in Purview, especially if you have an E5 license. All of this is available to you. And implementing it in an intelligent way is, the secret sauce that needs to be thought about to get you into that mature place where you're ready to take that step and start using these tools.
Adriano, just once and for all, what's in an E3 and what's in an E5? I got this question like always a lot. Like, is this in our E5? You go, probably not.
So E5 is everything essentially. So now Microsoft released E7. E7 is E5 plus free Copilot licenses. So don't think there's too much more than adding on the AI layer. E5 has essentially the full what we would call the compliance suite, right? So you get all of DLP, you get all of records management, you get all of sensitivity labeling. And when we say all, we mean you can create your labels and you can enforce records retention policies, but you can also use some of the automation to auto apply labels to your content. And that's something I'm going to come back to in a few slides here. Auto apply is a super big enabler for making it seamless for your end users. E3, you have the basics of labeling and you have the basics of data loss prevention, but that automation isn't necessarily there. So for users and for companies that have E3, there are really two choices, or I'll say three choices. Choice number one is to spend a little bit more money with Microsoft, not a full E5, but they have a compliance add-on that gives you full access to Purview. Option two is to put a lot more effort onto the plates of your users and ask them to take some of that governance into their day-to-day work. That depends on the trust level of the users and the ability of the users to carry that forward. And option three is to consider third-party products that may help Purview along and close some of those gaps without having to make a jump to an E5 license. But yeah, that's the E3 is where we have to get a little bit more creative if that's where they want to stay with licensing. So there is a lot more capability, I will say, with E5 inside Purview, and that is where it's such a good opportunity if you have an E5 to take advantage of all that if you're not already.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. Excuse me. So I want to talk a little bit about how we approach a project, right? So if someone comes to us and says, we're ready to implement our retention schedule, what do we do from here on out? Well, the first thing that we want to be able to do is, to Vanna's point, we want to answer both the previous question and the future focused question as part of a project. We don't want to leave you questioning whether or not you can or can't do whether or not it'll be required to do cleanup again in the future, right? It won't be. We want to leave you, able to clean up the stuff from the past and not having to spend as much time cleaning up in the future. That planning phase is where we establish that governance framework. We want to make sure you have the capability to understand roles and responsibilities, understand policies and procedures, understand how your retention schedule is going to be implemented, and make sure it has the enforceability you need to act on it using your content. From there, we proceed into design. Design is where we spend the time to construct a SharePoint environment that makes sense for your organization and that makes sense for the governance you want to apply. That takes time, that takes consultation, that takes effort. It's not simple. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it and say, yeah, we do that like that. It really is the effort and the thought and ultimately the piece that makes the biggest difference in this. Designing the environment to match your governance needs will make then applying governance 1,000 times easier. And when we go to build, we obviously build SharePoint for you. We help you configure it. That's a flexible type of thing. But that includes the build of Purview to apply the right labels into the right places in your structure. And I think that's a big differentiator because we want to make sure you have a solution that you can use from day one that is fully governed and fully protected in the way you want it to be protected. And then
yeah, and then SharePoint is kind of like the basis for everything, right? In Microsoft nowadays, or because I think Teams sites are based on SharePoint. yeah, I think it's kind of like the cornerstone, or am I missing something?
Nope, you are correct. And we talk about SharePoint because SharePoint is the underlying storage for OneDrive, is the underlying storage for pretty much everything in the Microsoft environment. The question of whether or not you want Teams in your environment is entirely up to you as a preference type of thing. We can link your sites to Teams. We don't have to link your sites to Teams. That is entirely what you want it to become. If your people prefer to work in Teams, we can govern the SharePoint backend of Teams very easily with Purview, just as easy as we can do a standard SharePoint site. And we have, for reference, we do have clients that have said, I want my entire structure outside of Teams. I don't want to use Teams for anything related to a team. Great, no problem. Your people are working in the web browser, your people are working in SharePoint specifically. We've had other clients that said, oh, these people need a team, but these people don't. Great, hybrid. And we've had people go entirely Teams. Everything is a team. We want people to work primarily through Teams. Great, no problem. We can do that. But again, it depends on the willingness and ability of the organization to adapt and to use that interface. Excuse me. So on the tail end, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Testing and that type of stuff is always very important, but I want to talk a little bit about the readiness and the migration, right? So that's very important. We want to make sure that the migration and the cleanup process are led by you, and we want to make sure that they are reflecting the cleanup that you want to do. It's a great opportunity to solve that historical data problem, right? Being able to choose what comes forward into your new environment and what can be cleaned out on day one, being able to reorganize it into the structure that makes more sense, and being able to tag it on day one with a retention label is really powerful. Excuse me. And that's where we find a lot of value out of this project. Like, yes, great, you get a new SharePoint environment, super wonderful, but that cleanup is very important. And we have ways to help accelerate that cleanup now, even with AI enabled tools, to make sure that it's not a drag on your organization as you try to get rid of some of that rot. And the other thing I want to point out about our approach, but just in general, as you go down this road, that bar at the bottom, training and change management. Now, I am a technologist by trade. I am a computer scientist by background. I get the technology like, no tomorrow. But something I learned over these past 10 years is technology is not even half the battle. The biggest battle you will face is the users. And you need to make sure they are supported. They feel that this is a positive change. They feel that they are getting a benefit from it. And ultimately that they are ready to tackle and ready to use this environment effectively. We bake change management into every project, and I encourage you to do the same. Pay attention to what your users are saying. Make sure they're communicated to, and make sure that they feel that they are brought along for the ride and that they are ready to use the environment effectively in the way that you've designed it. Missing the user component is one of the biggest mistakes that I made early in my career. And I was taught by some very smart people smarter than I, about the importance of the people factor. And I can't stress that enough in this specific arena, that is so important. So let's talk about Purview for a second. So we all know Purview is where retention is going to be. And those retention labels are very flexible in a lot of ways. Some things that I want to point out about these labels. One, retention labels are more than just SharePoint. Retention labels can be outside of SharePoint. That's the power of Purview. That's why it's the all-in-one compliance solution for everything Microsoft. Well, records management is really important. The thing that people often forget about, emails. Emails are records too. You can manage them in place in Exchange now using Purview retention labels, or have them filed away into SharePoint as records managed with a SharePoint retention. All of that depends on your setup. The schedule is built into the label, and that's one thing that some records managers coming from older systems aren't really used to. The label and the classification are merged. sorry, the schedule and the classification are merged. Other systems may have separated them. So it's one thing in SharePoint, and that's where we get into this complexity of the 1,000 label limit, because we're merging a schedule and a label together. The other thing I want to note about retention labels, and I'll give you a best practice piece of caution here. There's ability to use it for locking. So we can finalize a record, lock it down at the end of its life, and make sure that it's not touched for the remainder of the retention. Super valuable. But there is this feature in Purview called the regulatory record label, which people should be scared of. The fact that it says regulatory should be frightening, because unless you absolutely need it, we recommend don't use it. Because if you put one in and you're not absolutely sure you need it, you can't delete it. The record label will exist forever in perpetuity, because Microsoft won't even touch it. Even if you call Microsoft and say, delete this for me, please, please, we will not do it. So it's very important.
Yeah, and which I find very fascinating, because also the name regulatory, there are a few laws in this world that say that you need to keep things permanent, but the vast majority will dictate a way shorter retention period. So, and also the kind of like, you apply a label and then it gets locked is also sometimes a bit scary, especially if you're going to do this at scale. That's the whole point. Let's start auto applying these things, and so I'm not sure how you feel about locking any documents, because it feels like a very official moment. Like you've done your project, it has ended. Now I'm applying the label now at the end of everything, and now I can safely lock it. While you might already apply it while you're still working on it. I'm not sure how you look at that.
So let me answer that by going to the next slide, because there's something interesting here about event-based retention that is interesting in Purview, right? And the only time that we've ever seen, and at least in my experience, I'm not sure if my colleagues have seen the same, the only time that I've ever seen anyone use a locked record label is when we are ending a project and want to lock down the final deliverable so no one can touch it. When an event has happened and I want to make sure no one can change it otherwise. One thing I want to quickly introduce on this last point before we get to event-based retention is the approval workflow. So one of the things that rapidly increases your number of labels in Purview is having a single type of label that is at different departments that needs to be approved by different people before disposition. So if I have, for example, an invoices label, and each department head needs to review invoices before they're disposed of, that creates, 20 labels in and of itself, because I need a different label per approver. Power Automate is a solution in this endeavor. If we wanted to, we can have one label that kicks off one Power Automate workflow. And then all the logic of who has to approve based on the department is baked into Power Automate. It adds complexity on the Power Automate side, but that's generally okay, because we can handle that complexity better instead of creating 40 different labels for each department to do the same approval of the same class of document. So that's just a little tip on the back end to make it easier to reduce that number of labels across your environment. So this is kind of what I was talking about already, how that file plan can grow rapidly, again, if you don't pay attention to making sure that you're more specific about it. And I want to talk a little bit about labeling policies now. So event-based retention is a bit of a sticking point for people that use Purview. And event-based retention is some of the most common retention. Like, let's be real, everyone has an event-based retention somewhere in their retention policy. It's inevitable. Even if it's as simple as contract expiry, for example, you want to retain, you want nothing to change during the contract life. When the contract expires, you retain for 5 years and then you delete, just as an example, right? The retention treatment technically is going to change when the event happens. So we need to be able to record the event and understand that the retention is going to change after that event. Traditionally, what Microsoft will tell you is there's an event event-based retention module in Purview that will trigger an event on a certain date and attach it to certain documents. The complexity that exists is that in order to make that module work effectively, you have to attach what's called a compliance asset ID to every single record that is applied to that event. That action is really tough because compliant asset ID is an open-ended column that you have to go back and make sure you attach to every individual record that is applied to that event. That doesn't sound very appetizing to most of my clients, and most people don't want to do it, and that's okay. If you want to do it, great. If you don't, there's a better way. And the better way is to use auto apply. So if you have E5, you have access to auto apply, which uses logic and the background engine called the keyword query language, not to be confused with KQL, which is custom query language, because Microsoft loves to use the same terminology for different things. Keyword query language allows you to use the search engine to search the properties of a document and find a trigger among the properties to know when to apply a retention. So how we would use this is we would have an area for contracts, and we would have a column called contract status, which is defaulted to active. And when the contract expires, we would ask someone to go in and change the contract status column to expired. That could be done automatically through a workflow, that could be controlled in some other way, or it could be flipped manually by a user. On the back end, we're going to use an auto apply policy, and that's going to search the contracts repository for any time it finds contract equals expired. And when it finds contract equals expired, it grabs that contracts label and it plunks it onto that document. And then if our policy is to retain from the date the contract expired for another 5 years and then delete, the day that it finds that contract expired metadata and applies the label is the date we have to count 5 years from. So Microsoft allows us to use the terminology of labeled date. So the date we take that label and put it on the document, we count 5 years and then we delete. So we have the capability to use auto apply as the method of automation to apply that label after an event occurs and then count for the retention from that date. It sounds complex, I will say that, but it is the most straightforward and simplest way to use what's out of the box in Purview to get that event-based retention working more efficiently and without having to have people enter a compliance asset ID. It works quite elegant, and we have tons of clients using this, and it works really well.
And I think a lot of times you read something like, and this is how computer systems were built by developers, and developers have a very simple view of information, and that is it's been created, modified, and those are and of course at one point deleted, but that's the whole purpose of this tool. So let's do last modified or something. Well, last modified has usually legally almost no bearing. It means nothing. It's when was the contract last modified? No. When was it expired? So that's the real event. So if this can fix that, then yay, that's good news. Yeah.
Yay, indeed. But the caveat I'll give us all here is that it depends on good design, right? We need the metadata to tell us when the event has happened in order for us to use auto apply effectively. So as long as you have that forethought and that design thought in your head, it will work. Other thing I want to note on is that if you apply something with a label, if you apply a label to a document, regardless of the setting, it will always protect the document from deletion. So if you leave it unlocked, that's fine. But if someone tries to maliciously or accidentally click delete, there's this thing in SharePoint called the preservation hold library. It catches it and makes sure that it's still retained for the period we need to retain it, even though people can't see it in SharePoint. The preservation hold library is only accessible to admins, so no one else can touch it, but it's super valuable to be that net to make sure nothing can escape SharePoint outside of retention. And the other thing I want to note is the easiest way, if you're going based on created date in your retention schedule, for example, or something like that, the easiest way to get labels onto content is to use location-based defaults. That is something we also say for sensitivity labels. Sensitivity labels based on location make life easy, because if you know a location is supposed to be relatively sensitive, apply a label to everything in the location, and suddenly you get the protection very easily and very quickly. So the other thing I want to point out, again, sometimes Purview is not going to be the right solution, and that's okay. We love Microsoft, but transparently, I don't get paid any money to tell you Microsoft is the only solution. So we do have other solutions on the market. We partner with one of them, but there are other ones out there, and I encourage you to do your homework and look at them that purport to be able to do retention on your content in SharePoint without having to use Purview. And these might need to be considered, and that's fully okay. And if you do, I implore you to ask 4 questions of these vendors. 1, do they take a copy of your SharePoint data? And there are vendors out there that will take a copy of your data out of your SharePoint and put it in their system to do records management on it. If you're comfortable with that, great. From my perspective, that raises a lot of data privacy and data security concerns that I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with. The second one is, do they price based on volume or users? That may change the economics of adding the tool to your environment. The third one is, will their retention engine actually handle your use cases? Like, is your event-based retention going to be handled effectively with their retention engine? And fourth, reporting. Make sure that their reporting is sufficient for your needs, make sure that it's durable, and make sure you're going to have the background information you need to operate your program effectively. We are highly supportive of taking the approach of check Purview first. If you have the full E5 licenses, let's see if Purview will work. And if it doesn't, or if there's something that's standing in the way, then let's evaluate what's on the market for other tools and look at other options. And that, again, shouldn't be considered a loss. It's just the way of the world when it comes to enforcing effective retention to solve all those problems we talked about earlier in the presentation and try to avoid that risk. So I'm going to hand it back to Vanna now. Oh, sorry, this is a different slide. My apologies. One more slide. The thing I have to talk about really quickly. So as part of trying to get people into the right frame of mind to address this problem, we work with Vanna and his team to offer a quick workshop to just understand more about your specific environment, identify some of those problems, and help you to create a roadmap to try to navigate to that end state where you want to be. It's not a sales pitch. I want to be clear, even though I am the director of sales and customer success, the commercial guy, I'm not here to make a sales pitch to you about this. This is truthfully just a free service that we offer to get you on the right path to success and to tell you the things that you need to tackle to get to that endpoint you want to be in. If you're interested, reach out to us, let us know. We're more than happy to talk more about it.
Yeah, so and thank you so much, Adriana. You know, we want to focus on helping you guys genuinely to finally fix records management in Microsoft. Again, the biggest battle you will have to fight is with your own users, but maybe also with your leadership. And with the powers that be that might say this is too expensive, too lengthy. I guess nowadays with AI we can fix anything, so also this problem, and but you have to do it. and you have to make sure that you stand on the shoulders of so many other organizations who have actually demonstrated it can be done. And as you know, the data protection authorities and whatever regulatory authority that you are subject to are becoming more stringent, you really have to start looking into this, because now with AI, and especially in the age of AI agents, this information can just be turned into action, and it will treat people, and it will have an impact on, you know, the fair treatment of people, their privacy, everything. So you can't just sit on your hands and do nothing. That time is over. And just to kind of create a little bit of a cognitive dissonance here, a lot of our clients are looking into this now and actually, you know, creating the project specs and going for it, whether it's Purview, whether it's some other third party you know, tool that they use. I don't really care about the tool. It's about, you know, addressing you know, unstructured data. So yeah, there's a question here from David, by the way. You mentioned oversharing, Adriana, as a key risk. How do you quantify or measure overexposure in a real environment?
Yeah,
That
that can be.
yeah, yeah.
That's a rough question because it can be a bit subjective in some cases, because some things may be considered over or undershared. It all depends on the context of the organization, but the simple measurement is there is now a report available from Microsoft inside your SharePoint environment that will tell us where a link is created that is accessible to everyone in your organization. At the very minimum baseline bedrock level, that report tells us overexposure, because theoretically there should be very minimal situations where that is acceptable. And if that is acceptable, chances are there should just be a location where documents that are available to the entire organization are stored, and it shouldn't be dependent on the sharing link. So that type of report is very easy and very simple to just, you know, have a baseline understanding of that.
Yeah. Another question from Rose. Can you share what good looks like in terms of adoption? What are there any benchmarks or maturity indicators?
There are organizations that purport to give you benchmarks that you can like purchase benchmarks from. I think they're a little bit loose. What I like to always say is where you are today is your baseline, right? There are questionnaires and surveys that we can release to people to build that baseline for you. The best indicator of that comes in through reinforcement after the launch, right? So what we like to say as part of our change management plans that we put out there, we have a reinforcement phase after the tool goes live, where we check in with the users and ask them similar questions to the baseline questions. One of the questions we love to ask is, where are you putting most of your documents today? Baseline might be on my desktop. Maturity stage 2 is I put everything in my SharePoint site. And then that's a great indicator of improvement. It's really hard to have, because of the differences in how organizations manage their information, it's very hard to have standardized benchmarks across industries. There is, again, some information out there, but really what we prefer to do is have baseline versus improvement measurements specific to your organization to demonstrate improvements in.
All right. Well, thank you. And how long does a typical project last for you guys? Like, how is this years? Is this weeks? How should I see this?
I'm going to give you my favorite consultant answer just because I can. It depends, because it's really hard to say. I would say most medium-sized organizations probably take between 12 to 18 months to get this right. Some organizations can move faster with the right allocation of people. Some organizations take longer because they just are more complex. It is not an, again, I'm not trying to minimize the task. It is an undertaking, and it does take time and effort to do it right. But the dividends it would pay, I think, outweigh the cost up front in terms of time.
All right, brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Adriano. I for sure have learned a lot to just quote a bit of an obvious ending, but yeah, I really think in 2026 we can fix records retention, records management in Microsoft, at least Microsoft 365. And if you have a problem with, Purview not being able to reach your old legacy file shares and all of that, just bring it into SharePoint then. Yeah, there you go. So that's probably something that Microsoft really wanted me to say. Yeah, so thank you very much. To be continued, Adriano. Maybe we can invite you again in a few months, or even longer, to kind of talk about the trends then. Yeah, let's fix records management once and for all. Have a wonderful day, everyone. From sunny Greece, where I am at, and I think sunny Canada, where Adriano is at. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.